There's a strange feeling almost everyone has experienced at least once. You walk through an old city. The streets are wide, the buildings are massive, the doors stretch far above your head, and everything feels off. Not broken, not abandoned, just mismatched. Like you're wearing someone else's clothes that were never meant for you. And the question quietly forms in your mind. Who was this really built for? We're told the answer is simple. Kings, empires, religion, national pride. We're told that people in the 18th and 19th centuries, riding horses and lighting homes with candles, somehow decided to build the most precise, monumental, and globally unified architecture the world has ever seen. And we're told they did it all with hand tools, primitive logistics, and limited energy. But what if that story doesn't hold up? What if the world we inherited wasn't built by the people history credits, but by a civilization we barely remember? Look at the buildings themselves, not the dates stamped on plaques, not the stories in textbooks. Look at the structure, the geometry, the scale, the engineering logic. Because when you do, something unsettling becomes impossible to ignore. Across Europe, North America, South America, Asia, and Australia, you find the same architectural language repeating itself. Domes, columns, arches, perfect symmetry, identical proportions. It doesn't matter whether you're standing in Paris, St. Petersburg, Washington, D.C., Buenos Aires, or Mumbai. The buildings speak the same design dialect. This isn't cultural influence. This isn't imitation. This is standardization. And standardization only makes sense when a civilization is unified, coordinated, and operating at a scale far beyond local kingdoms or fragmented nations. Even more disturbing is the level of precision involved. Massive stone blocks cut with near-millimeter accuracy. Granite and marble shaped into curves modern CNC machines struggle to replicate. Metal elements integrated seamlessly into stone long before electrical infrastructure supposedly existed. Official history tells us this was achieved by illiterate stonemasons using chisels and hammers, but engineers know better. Precision isn't a matter of effort alone. It's a matter of tooling, measurement, and energy. And that raises the first forbidden question. Where did the energy come from? Before oil, before electricity grids, before modern industry, we're expected to believe societies barely capable of mass-producing nails somehow moved, cut, lifted, and assembled stone on an industrial scale across the entire planet. And then there are the spires. We're told they're religious symbols, decorations, expressions of faith reaching toward the heavens. But look closer. The metal finials, the layered geometry, the conductive materials, the way these structures dominate skylines with striking consistency. To an engineer's eye, they don't look symbolic, they look functional. They resemble antenna systems, structures designed not just to be seen, but to interact with the environment itself. Atmospheric electricity, resonance, energy capture and distribution, concepts that modern science often dismisses as fringe or pseudoscience, despite experimental evidence scattered throughout history. What if free wireless energy wasn't a dream, but a forgotten standard? What if these buildings weren't temples first, but infrastructure? This theory becomes harder to dismiss when you notice how these structures are distributed. They aren't random. They appear like nodes in a grid, carefully spaced, strategically placed, as if part of a planetary system rather than isolated monuments. And then there's the problem of scale. Walk into an old train station, palace, or cathedral. The ceilings soar 5, 10, sometimes even 15 meters high. The doors tower above you. The steps feel oversized. The railings reach your chest or neck. None of this is ergonomic for modern humans. We're told this was done to inspire awe, to intimidate, to glorify rulers. But architecture doesn't work that way. Not functional architecture. Not on this scale. When resources are limited, builders design for efficiency, for comfort, for the physical dimensions of the user. No rational society builds doors that require multiple people to open daily. No engineer designs staircases that exhaust the average body unless those bodies were never the intended users. The buildings tell a silent story. They weren't made for us. Balconies offer another clue. In modern design, railings sit at waist level, allowing a person to rest their arms and look outward comfortably. In countless antique buildings, these railings reach neck height. Leaning is awkward. Visibility is poor. Safety feels inverted. Unless the person standing there was significantly taller. Suddenly, the idea sounds absurd. Giants? Really? But pause for a moment. Remove the emotional reaction. Look at the evidence. Entire interiors scaled beyond human proportions, handles placed too high, windows starting far above the floor, furniture layouts that make no sense for our bodies. We compensate constantly. We install smaller doors inside massive gates. We lower ceilings. We add floors. We partition rooms. We retrofit heating systems into spaces never designed to be heated. We are adapting to an environment that wasn't designed for us. And history offers another strange piece of the puzzle. Look at photographs from the late 19th century. Early city images, streets of Paris, New York, Chicago, Moscow. Entire avenues appear eerily empty. Buildings stand complete, infrastructure is intact, but people are scarce. And when people do appear, something feels deeply wrong. There are children everywhere. Children in factories, children in mines, children operating machinery for 12 to 14 hours a day, children filling the streets, fields, and workshops of the world. We're told this was poverty, cruel capitalism, hard times. But ask the obvious question history avoids. Where were the adults? In every known traditional society, adults shield children from the worst labor whenever possible, even during famine and war, even during collapse. The normalization of mass child labor doesn't signal hardship alone. It signals absence, an absence of an adult population. It looks less like exploitation and more like replacement, as if a massive portion of humanity vanished, leaving behind cities too complex, too large, too advanced for the survivors to understand. And into this void stepped children, orphans, teenagers, entire generations without parents. History records orphan trains transporting thousands of children across continents, overcrowded orphanages, homeless youth forming the backbone of labor forces, a world being restarted with a population that had no memory of what came before. And children are easy to shape. They don't ask who built the world, they're taught how to maintain it, how to operate fragments of systems they don't fully understand, how to survive inside structures that feel alien but unavoidable. They inherit ruins and are told they are progress. And then there's the ground beneath our feet. Walk through any old city center. Look at the buildings carefully. The first floors are buried. Windows sit half underground. Grand entrances lead into walls of soil. We're told this is a cultural layer, that centuries of dirt, trash, and pavement slowly raised street levels by several meters. But think logically. No homeowner watches dirt rise to cover their windows and doors without digging it away. Roads are resurfaced by removing layers, not stacking them endlessly. And when excavations occur, the truth reveals itself. Those basements aren't basements. They're full floors with ornate doors, decorative columns, arches, windows designed for light and air. No one builds basements like that. The soil covering them isn't household debris. It's dense, uniform clay, sediment, material consistent with massive floods or mud flows. Evidence points to a global catastrophe, a sudden event, a mud flood that buried cities worldwide under meters of earth. And the survivors did what they could. They leveled the ground, turned second floors into first floors, sealed off buried rooms, moved on. This explains the decay seen before the industrial boom, a world recovering, repurposing, imitating technologies it no longer understood. And just when the picture seems complete, another anomaly emerges: star forts. Perfect geometric fortifications scattered across every continent. Identical shapes, identical layouts, massive earthworks requiring precision only visible from above. We're told these were built by different nations in different eras for defense, but their geometry demands aerial perspective, advanced surveying, earth-moving capabilities rivaling the pyramids. And there are thousands of them. This wasn't defense. This was infrastructure. A planetary system, possibly for energy, possibly for transport, possibly for control of water, resonance, or frequency. And it all points back to the same uncomfortable idea. The 19th century didn't build this world. It inherited it. And in part 2, we'll look at the exhibitions, the fires, the erased cities, and the suspicious demolition of temporary palaces that may have been anything but temporary. If the world we live in is inherited, not built, then there must have been a moment when that inheritance was deliberately reframed. A moment when the past was repackaged, relabeled, and quietly erased in plain sight. And strangely enough, that moment appears right where official history celebrates itself the most. The late 19th and early 20th centuries. An era we're taught to admire, an age of invention, progress, steam, and industry. But beneath the triumphant narrative, something deeply unsettling begins to emerge. Enter the World Fairs. Chicago, Paris, St. Louis, San Francisco. Entire cities of palaces, canals, domes, towers, and halls appear almost overnight. Structures of such complexity and grandeur they rival ancient Rome, Athens, and Babylon. Perfect symmetry, massive stone facades, electrification, plumbing, sculptures the size of buildings. And then we're told something almost unbelievable. They were temporary. According to official history, these cities were built in 1 or 2 years using wood, plaster, and straw-like materials. They were supposedly designed to look like stone, but weren't. And after the fairs ended, they were demolished, burned, blown up, reduced to rubble. Pause and think about that. Imagine an economy without modern logistics, without heavy machinery, without global supply chains. A world still relying on horses and steam. And we're expected to believe governments and investors spent what would be billions today to construct cities of impossible complexity, only to destroy them months later. That isn't ambition, that's insanity. No society behaves like that unless there's something it desperately wants hidden. Photographs of these exhibitions betray the official story. Close-up images show stone textures too detailed for plaster, structural elements too massive for temporary framing, foundations that make no sense for short-term use. And then there's the labor problem. If these were built in months, who built them? The same period shows a suspicious lack of adult workers and an abundance of children. Once again, the pattern repeats. A workforce that doesn't fit the task it supposedly accomplished. A far more disturbing explanation begins to make sense. These cities weren't built for the fairs. They already existed. The fairs were inventories, cleaning operations, public rebranding campaigns, facade restorations designed to present ancient infrastructure as modern achievement. What could be repurposed was showcased. What didn't fit the new narrative was destroyed. And destruction has a preferred method: fire. History books mention fires casually: the Great Chicago Fire, the burning of the Crystal Palace, fires at World Fair sites, fires in old city centers, fires that conveniently destroyed archives, blueprints, and original construction records. Fire doesn't just erase buildings, it erases questions. Ash doesn't explain how something was made. And after the fires came rewriting. Symbols were removed, statues melted down, reliefs chipped away, dates reassigned, builders invented, entire architectural movements retroactively attributed to newly formed nations that didn't even exist when the structures were supposedly built. But the falsifiers made a critical mistake. They couldn't change the climate encoded in stone. Look closely at so-called classical architecture in cold regions: Russia, Canada, Northern Europe, the American Midwest. Buildings filled with massive floor-to-ceiling windows, thin glass, no insulation, no vestibules. Any engineer will tell you this is thermal suicide. In cold climates, you build small windows, thick walls, entryways that trap air, double doors. Yet these grand buildings ignore all of that. Giant doors open directly to the street, vast interior volumes impossible to heat with wood or coal. And there's something even more revealing. There are no chimneys. Original facades lack flues. Roof lines show no signs of smoke exhaust. Fireplaces and stoves appear added later, crudely punched through walls, breaking symmetry and ornamentation. These buildings were not designed for winter, which leads to a shocking conclusion. When they were built, winter as we know it may not have existed. The architecture suggests a stable, mild global climate, an eternal spring or summer, minimal temperature differences, no need for heating, no fear of cold air rushing inside. This aligns disturbingly well with another anomaly: ceiling heights. 5 meters, 10 meters, sometimes more. Heating such spaces conventionally would be impossible. Warm air rises, people freeze below. Fuel consumption would be catastrophic. Unless heating wasn't necessary, unless the environment itself was regulated. What if the ancient infrastructure wasn't just architectural, but climatic? What if the same global energy system hinted at by spires, domes, and star forts also maintained atmospheric conditions, pressure, temperature, resonance, a planetary machine? And then something happened. A collapse, a shift, a catastrophe that didn't just bury cities in mud, but shattered the systems that stabilized the world itself. Climate changed rapidly. Winters appeared. Floods reshaped landscapes. Survivors were thrown into buildings that suddenly became unlivable. Panic followed. Windows were bricked up, ceilings lowered, rooms partitioned, stoves hacked into walls, entire floors abandoned underground. We call this adaptation, but it's really survival inside a world that stopped working. And now look again at photographs from the late 1800s. People look out of place, small, ragged, confused, pulling wooden carts through avenues designed for speeds and loads they never carry, selling vegetables at the foot of cyclopean columns, living like squatters inside a civilization they didn't build. This is not progress. This is regression. A post-apocalyptic society learning to survive among ruins while being told it's advancing. The story of linear progress collapses under its own weight. Humanity didn't climb steadily upward from caves to skyscrapers. It fell, and then it forgot. But the strongest evidence of forgetting lies not in buildings or fairs or fires. It lies in who we think we are. If we didn't build this world, then what is our role in it? In Part 3, we confront the final implications: identity, memory, cycles of civilization, and the uncomfortable possibility that history isn't something that happened long ago, but something that was done to us. If the world we inhabit was not designed for us, and history was rewritten to make us believe it was, then the most dangerous question isn't about the past. It's about identity. Because once you accept that civilizations can vanish, that entire global systems can collapse and be erased from memory, a terrifying realization follows. it can happen again. And maybe it already has. Look at how fragile modern life really is. We don't generate our own energy. We don't build our own homes from raw materials. We don't understand the infrastructure we rely on. Most people can't explain how electricity reaches their wall, how water arrives at their tap, or how food travels thousands of miles to their plate. We don't live in a world we control. We live in a world we operate. That distinction matters, because operators don't need to understand origins, they only need instructions. This may explain why education emphasizes memorization over comprehension, why history is taught as dates and names, not systems and processes, why children learn what to think, not how to question. A population that doesn't ask where things come from is easy to manage. And when you revisit the architecture with this in mind, the silence becomes deafening. The buildings don't brag, they don't explain themselves, they simply exist. Massive, precise, indifferent to our confusion, like relics from a forgotten age that don't care whether we understand them or not. We added plaques, we invented builders, we assigned styles, we labeled eras. But labels are not explanations. And there's a reason the idea of a reset is ridiculed so aggressively. Because if history is cyclical, not linear, then progress isn't guaranteed. If advanced civilizations existed before us and collapsed, then technology doesn't equal wisdom, power doesn't equal permanence, and modern society isn't the final chapter of human achievement. It's just another iteration, one that may already be forgetting too much. Consider how quickly knowledge disappears. Entire crafts lost within generations, ancient construction techniques we still can't replicate, stonework more precise than modern methods, structures that survive earthquakes, floods, and centuries of neglect, while newer buildings crumble in decades. We tell ourselves we're smarter, but smarter people don't forget how their own world works. And then there's the psychological component. Why does the idea of a lost civilization feel uncomfortable, even offensive? Because it threatens the narrative that we are the pinnacle, that everything before us was primitive, that the present is the reward for past struggle. If that belief collapses, so does the justification for authority. Because who gets to rule a world they didn't build? Who gets to define truth in a civilization they inherited? History, in that light, stops being a record of events and becomes a tool, not to preserve memory, but to control perception. Erase giants, and you erase the possibility that humans were once different. Erase global infrastructure, and you erase the idea of unity beyond nations. Erase free energy concepts, and you ensure dependence. Erase resets, and you convince people collapse is impossible. But the architecture refuses to comply. The buried floors still exist. The star forts still trace the planet. The domes still crown cities. The proportions still don't fit us, and no amount of storytelling can change stone. What if humanity isn't evolving upward but oscillating, rising, falling, forgetting, restarting? Each cycle leaving behind fragments too large to destroy completely, but too inconvenient to explain honestly. And maybe that's why the past feels unreal, why timelines feel compressed, why photographs from the 1800s feel staged, empty, uncanny, why entire cities seem to appear fully formed, why adults are missing, why children dominate the labor force, why rebuilding happens faster than logic allows. These aren't coincidences, they're symptoms of a reset that was never meant to be acknowledged. And here's the most unsettling thought of all. If we are squatters in a world built by others, then we are living inside a test we don't understand. A system that once functioned flawlessly without us, a system we patched together and claimed as our own. And the question isn't whether the past was greater. The question is whether we're repeating the same mistake that ended it. Arrogance. forgetting, assuming permanence, because every civilization believes it's the last one, until it isn't. So the next time you walk through an old city, stand beneath a towering dome, or pass a building that feels too big, too precise, too advanced for its supposed era, don't ask who built it according to the textbook. Ask a more dangerous question. What kind of world builds something like this? And what does it say about us that we're still living inside it without knowing why? If this perspective made you see the world differently, share it with someone who still believes history only moves forward. Subscribe if you want to keep exploring the questions we're not supposed to ask. Because the truth isn't hidden. It's standing all around us. We've just been trained not to look.